Good morning. My name is Dale Horahan, and we're here at Lamppa Manufacturing. This is where we manufacture the Vaporfire 100 furnace. That is the cleanest wood-burning furnace the EPA has ever tested in North America. The furnace produces less than 0.095 pounds of particulate matter per million BTUs of emissions. That's significantly below the EPA requirement. I think we're like 32% below their required standard for emissions. So it is the cleanest wood furnace they've ever tested. We first got certified for the NSPS Phase 2, which is their highest standard, in 2017. We started marketing these in 2018 with the EPA certification on them. Now we do have to get these recertified every 5 years. That's just part of the normal EPA process. So in addition to that, every 2 years we have to provide the EPA with a list of how many furnaces we sell into each state in the US. And we have to do this, submit this every 2 years. So this year, or 2022, we were coming to the end of our first 5 years. September 1st, 2022 was the end of our certification, our first certification process, so we needed to renew prior to September 1st. So in June, trying to be ahead of the game, I sent a letter into the EPA and asked them, or said that I would like to renew our certification. And a couple days later, I get a letter back and they say, oh, we require a 90-day notice. Well, I got back to them right away. I said, when did that come out? And they said, oh, we just implemented that in June. And I said, well, did you send us a notice? And they said, no, we have no responsibility to communicate with the manufacturers. And so the only way we would find out about this is by looking at their website basically every day to see if they've made some rule change. So anyway, we still needed to get renewal by September 1. So, and since we were the first company to ever be certified to Phase 2, we knew that no one else was in the queue to get certified. And so I kept emailing them every few weeks to find out status updates and never heard anything back. And then just a couple days before September 1st, I received a letter from the EPA saying that we had 11 variances that we were out of compliance for renewal of our certificate. So they sent me this letter with all these items listed, and as I went through this whole list, there were 11 of them. Not a single one had to do with anything that Lamppa had any impact on. All of the issues were either the test lab transposed a number in the report from one page to the next page, or missed some information in the test lab, or didn't submit some data in the report, and so it was all. And then a few of the items were miscommunications between the EPA and the test lab. So none of these items were things that we ourselves could affect. Now the other thing on top of that is there's two divisions within the EPA that we're dealing with. The first one is I'm not sure what this stands for, but the OAQPS, and that's the division that actually creates the test standard for the emissions and sets the acceptable emissions for the EPA testing. And I have to admit, they've been really pretty decent to work with, and I don't want to beat up on the EPA. they've been you have to understand, it's a huge organization, and there's been some wonderful people to work with. And actually, in a huge organization, there's also some people that are really no fun to work with. And then there's the other group we deal with, and that's the enforcement group, that once you set the standard, the enforcement group makes sure that you're actually meeting the standard. And so as the letter with the 11 issues, that came from the enforcement group. So obviously we got on the phone with them, we had conference calls with them, and we said, okay, none of these were issues that we had any control over. Can you give us a waiver or just give us an extension so we can continue selling until we can get these issues taken care of? And we had a nice long conference call, and the result of that was no. And we said, well, is there any flexibility here at all? And the response was no. There was no response, and they got really, this was the enforcement group, got really a little bit not real friendly, and said that I wasn't to communicate with anybody except their attorney. And so anyway, we talked about what had to be done to rectify these issues, and in the course of this, the enforcement group, now remember, the enforcement group does not create the standard. They enforce it. The OAQPS group sets the standard. But now for the recertification or the renewal, the enforcement group decided that no, manufacturers have to hit a lower emission standard than what the published standard is. And so now we had to get under, okay, there's, they used to do an average emissions, but now they said there's 4 categories of burns that we have to hit. And if you have any burn that was over 0.014 pounds of particulate matter per million BTUs, you didn't pass. So the enforcement group now was setting the standard and setting it lower than what the official group that sets the standard set it at. So we decided we better go and recertify or retest for all 4 burns. So now, remember, none of this time we can't sell furnaces, so we're in a panic. So it took us a month. We had to schedule with the lab, and they could get us in a month. There's always a waiting line to get into the lab. Now, there's only 2 certified EPA test labs in the U.S. I believe one is in Portland, Oregon, and one is in Middleton, Wisconsin, a right suburb of Madison. So we went down there, and the first week, now this costs us about $25,000 to $30,000 a week of testing. So the first week, we were only able to pass 1 of the 4 burns. And so I couldn't understand why, because this furnace has always burned so clean. Well, we find out it wasn't emissions, but it was water vapor that was getting caught in the filters. Then I was informed by the test lab that no, for recertification, we don't use the regular filters. We now have to use Teflon filters because they catch much more of the emissions. And they also catch much more water vapor, and the water vapor would plug the filters, and once the filters were plugged, the test failed. So we managed to pass 1 of the burns that week, and so there went $30,000. Now we had to schedule another week of burns, and the earliest we could get down there was in November. And so we went back down in November, and in the meantime, they'd been going back and forth between the test lab and the EPA trying to figure out why we're getting so much water in the filters. Because the EPA was saying, no, you shouldn't be getting water in the filters, but we obviously were getting huge water and almost no emissions. So they finally said that they had to increase the velocity in the dilution chamber. I don't expect anybody to understand that. And then that would work. So instead of the normal velocity, we went to 200% of the velocity on the dilution chamber. And the first burn we did, we passed, but it was not a very good burn. It was rather high. It was our category 3 burn, and we still had a lot of water vapor in there. And so the next day, again, going back and forth between the EPA in Washington, D.C. and the test lab, they were talking back and forth, why is this happening? And so the next day, instead of setting it at the velocity at 200%, we set it at 150%. So then that day we ran a burn, and we got just incredible, just a beautiful burn. And so we finished that week out, and we were able to get 2 more of the burns, of the 4 required burns, completed before we ran out of firewood. And that's something else I should bring up. To do these tests, we provide the firewood. And you don't want to transfer firewood across state lines, so I had made the 7-hour trip down to Wisconsin Dells to pick up, okay, we need red oak for these tests, so I had to go pick up red oak from a very good customer of ours down there. Make sure it's between 18 and 28% moisture in 5 different locations in each piece of wood. And so on the second week, we finally ran out of wood, so we couldn't go any further. So now we had to schedule a 3rd week. So okay, now there was another 30,000 for that week of testing, so up to 60,000. So we had to schedule another week of testing, which they were good enough to get us in right away in December. So traveled back down in December, had more firewood along with us, had the firewood all cut to the right length, had it all split to the right thickness, and we did the burns again at 150% of the velocity in the dilution chamber. And this time, yes, we managed to get fabulous burns for category 1, and what thought was going to be easy actually was category 2 was probably one of the challenging ones. So we finished this in December, so now we've gone 5 months that we have not been able to sell a furnace during peak furnace season. So it's I shouldn't say this, but it almost feels like the EPA, instead of working with us, they're trying to work against us. And so then we finished that up right before Christmas, and now we have to get all the documents and the test report and all the new EPA data plates and everything updated before you can even submit to the EPA for approval. Well, now the test lab, not their fault, but their people were on vacation for 2 weeks. And when they came back, everybody's trying to get going. It's now the 13th of January. We still have not submitted all the data and documents for the final approval with the EPA. So we're still sitting here, not selling furnaces. We have furnaces stacked up all over the place, which we cannot ship or sell until we get the certificate from the EPA. And so that's where we are right now. It's been a very frustrating process. Like I said, there are some people at the EPA that I think are fabulous. They actually do work with us and not against us. They're very careful to make sure they follow all the rules and don't, you know, it's funny, they can't tell us things. We have to figure things out on our own. But they've been very helpful. Other people at the EPA have just been very frustrating. This is what the rule says. This is what you're going to do. There's no waivers. There's no extensions. So that's where we are today. We have completed all of the testing. We're just waiting for all the paperwork to be submitted by the lab in Wisconsin to the EPA. And as soon as that gets done, they have said they will fast track it, which we'll see. So that's been our process working with the EPA. It's been long and it's very frustrating dealing with this. The testing takes a lot of time, a lot of frustration, and I'm just glad to be done with it. So now it's taken us 5 months, and just like we've known all along, when everything is said and done, the Vaporfire 100 is still the cleanest furnace the EPA has ever tested. Now something else has changed. Instead of listing just an average burn under the new EPA rules, they've added, the Enforcement Division added another rule. Now you have to list the particulate matter, the pounds of particulate matter for every test burn category. So all 4 test burns are now on the aluminum plate that goes on the side of the furnace. And so, yes, we're still the cleanest furnace that you can buy.